They said she was lying, that no winter could do what she described, that frost didn't rise from the ground like fingers, that wolves didn't circle cabins so quiet you could hear breath freeze, that nobody's mother froze sitting upright in a rocking chair, a baby blue in her arms. They said she was touched, or a liar, or both, and at 12 years old, they told her to leave. Just like that. They gave her a half loaf of bread and 2 matchsticks and said, "You're old enough to fetch wood. You're old enough to walk." The man who said it had a limp and a red nose and a cabin where the glass always rattled in the wind. His wife wouldn't look her in the eye. The pastor said, "It's for the best." And the town's schoolmarm, who once gave her a kerchief when her nose bled in class, told her, "It'll build character." So she went. No one followed her past the cedar bend. She didn't cry, not then. The crying had dried up after the 3rd night. Her baby brother didn't make a sound in the cold. She walked with her boots too big and her coat too thin, but her eyes didn't blink. She remembered the slope of land, the low ridges that curved down toward the river, how the cold never settled there the same way. And by the 3rd mile, with the town now a blur of wood smoke and finger-pointing, she stopped walking and looked for the notch in the land she'd remembered since she was 5. It was there, just like the stories said, a dry place under the earth, a pocket beneath a stone shelf. Her mother had once whispered about it, back when the storms would make their cabin groan, when snow piled at the windows so high it blurred the sky. Her mother called it the warm stomach of the hill. It took her half a day to crawl down to it, and that's where it began. At 12 years old, she dug with her hands. She used flat rock shards to scrape back earth. She stripped bark from deadfall to weave for covering. There was no fairy tale to it, just hours of clawing through root and dirt and realizing that the deeper she went, the warmer the air stayed. Not warm like a fire, but not death, not the frost-bitten silence that took her family. She dug until her fingers bled. She used her breath to test the air. When it stopped steaming, she knew she'd gone deep enough. Nights were the worst. The noises in the dark weren't animals. Not always. The hill had a way of groaning, of settling, but she never ran, not after what she'd seen in the town, not after the way they called her a liar. She stayed and learned how dirt behaves when wet, how to stack stone against wall to keep it from falling in. She built the beginning of her shelter not with wood, but with earth, bent branches, mud. She wrapped herself in moss, in hides she'd scavenged from traps left by hunters who'd long abandoned them. She did it because she remembered what happened when you trusted the world above ground, when you believed a neighbor's promise that the storm will pass, when you thought one more log on the fire meant one more hour of survival. At 12, she learned you don't wait, you prepare. That first winter nearly killed her, but she lived, and not just lived, she adapted. She lined the floor with rocks she'd carried from the river. When warmed by a small fire, they held heat long after the flames died. She sealed the cracks with clay and straw. She dug a vent tunnel behind her sleeping alcove, something she'd never seen done, only dreamed. When the air moved right, it pulled smoke up and away without dragging the warmth with it. By spring, her body had grown lean, wiry. Her hands were calloused, her jaw set differently. She didn't smile much anymore, but when she did, it was slow, deliberate, like something earned. And when a trader wandered too far from the trail and stumbled on her smoke plume, she bartered for seed with a string of trout she'd dried with salt scraped from the rim of a nearby frozen basin. She didn't speak much to him, but he stared at her for a long time. "You got people?" he asked. "No," she said. "I got stone and heat." He left her a tin pot without being asked. She never saw him again. By the time she was 15, she had a second chamber dug out, smaller, lower, lined with hay and wood slats to keep things cool in summer and less frozen in winter. She learned how to build walls that breathed, how to bury heat below her bed, how to use ash to trick snowmelt into carving clean paths down the slope. She'd tamed her piece of earth, and by then, she was no longer alone. It wasn't a plan. Children just started appearing. First was Ellis, who'd run from a rail camp after his father got drunk and froze in a ditch. Then came Ruth, whose aunt said she was cursed because her feet turned inward. Then Micah, who never spoke about what happened, only watched the door like it owed him something. They didn't come all at once, but they came. They heard stories, rumors. The girl in the hill, the one who don't freeze. She eats snow, but don't starve. She didn't call herself anything. Farm, but they called her May. They asked if she'd let them stay. She said, "If you work." That was her only rule. And they did. They learned to dig and brace walls, to trap heat in stone, to store food in clay jars sealed with wax. There was no glory, no speeches, just hands blistered and nights survived. By the time May was 20, the shelter had become a hollowed hill, invisible from above unless you knew where to step. Rooms that looped, layers of warmth, a fire pit with a flue that carried heat between chambers, a place where winter couldn't bite as hard. And that's when the blizzard came. It started like all storms do, soft, uncertain, snow whispering at the edges of the wind. But May felt it in her teeth, that raw edge. That old sensation of dread that gripped her when she was still 12 and walking away from the town that had cast her out. She knew. "This one's different," she told the children. They were no longer children by age, but they'd grown under her roof, in her earth. She told them to stack the wood double, to brace the entry with logs and clay, to pull in the trap lines and bury what couldn't be stored. The frost came fast. By the second day, the air outside froze water mid-pour. By the third, the sky had vanished into a white curtain, and the wind screamed like something alive. Inside, May's shelter held. The fire flickered steady. The stones gave off heat. The vents carried smoke without cold. The children slept in shifts, warmed by beds of straw, blankets stitched from deer hide, and the design of a girl once exiled for lying about winter. On the fifth day, someone knocked. Not at the door, there was no door, but at the edge of the hill. Someone cried out, faint, hoarse, a voice scraping frost. May didn't move at first. She'd warned the others. No sound, no light from the surface. The storm could kill with confusion. But the voice came again. It was a name, hers, the same way it was spoken by the schoolmarm, who once handed her a kerchief and turned away when they threw her out. May rose, heart slow and hard. The voice had aged, grown hollow, but it was her name, and it wasn't the only voice anymore. There were more, not 3, not 5, dozens, calling for her. May stood still in the dark. Every instinct screamed at her to stay buried, to seal off the upper tunnel, to wait until the storm passed and pretend she'd heard nothing. But the voices outside weren't like the others she'd ignored in the past. Loners, drifters, even thieves who thought her hill was hollow treasure. No. This time, they knew her name. They said it the way people say a prayer when they've long since lost faith in anything else. Micah stirred from the lower chamber. He was tall now, stronger than most grown men, and quiet as ever. His eyes caught May's, then flicked toward the tunnel slope where sound filtered down in soft, broken echoes. Ellis and Ruth had roused too, shoulders stiff under layers of hide and wool, waiting. May didn't speak, she just moved. She unbarred the tunnel gate, little more than a framed mat of branches and clay stacked against the crawlway. Snow had blown into the narrow upper bend, forming a hard crust. May took her iron wedge and chipped at it slow, careful not to make a sound that might draw more attention. Cold spilled down, a ghost that made her lungs seize. She kept going. 10 feet up, she paused at the narrow earthen flap she'd built as the final barrier, a clever blend of sod, bark, and woven root that, from the outside, looked like nothing more than a windbreak of scrub. She pressed her ear to it. The voices were faint now, fainter still as the wind rose. But one broke through, hoarse and guttural. "May, I'm sorry." She froze. There were things she hadn't let herself remember, faces she'd buried deeper than her stone shells. But the cadence of that voice, the tremble behind it, unearthed everything at once. The pastor, he'd aged, but it was him, still alive, in this storm. May's breath came shallow, her limbs stiffened. But something else pushed her, something older than fear, not kindness, not vengeance, something simpler, survival. Because if he'd come crawling back now, in a storm this deadly, it meant everything out there had failed. The cabins, the firewood stacks, the horses and rail-fed wagons. Whatever pride the town held, whatever smugness kept them safe through every winter since they cast her out, had collapsed. And she needed to know how bad it really was. She slipped out. The cold hit like an iron bar. Her face stung instantly, skin crackling beneath frost. Snow surged sideways, not downward, in drifts that moved like dunes and fast forward. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. Her ears rang from the pressure. She crawled, using her arms to shield her face. The outer layer of snow had compacted to a sheet of crust, slick and hollow underneath. She dragged herself to the edge of the knoll, where the earth broke into a shallow swale, and there, huddled like a wounded animal, was the pastor. His beard was rimmed in ice, his coat too thin. He blinked, but didn't see her at first. "May?" he choked. She didn't answer, just grabbed his arm and dragged him by the armpits, one pull at a time, back through the snow. The wind fought her with every move. By the time she reached the tunnel again, her lips were numb and her legs quivered. Inside, warmth waited, faint but real. Ellis and Micah helped pull the man in. Ruth had already stoked the rocks to glow red at their core, and steam bloomed from the pastor's skin as the ice began to melt from his beard. His eyes fluttered, then settled. He wept. No one spoke for a while. They just watched the firelight dance across his face. Watched May sit cross-legged beside him like a stone guardian, waiting for the answer they all felt coming. He finally gave it. "It's gone," he rasped. "The town, all of it. At first, May thought he meant the roofs, maybe some of the cabins caved, maybe a storehouse or the old parsonage. But no, he meant it all. The storm came too soon, earlier than any before. The frost came in from the west, dry, sharp, a cold that shattered troughs and split wagon wheels. The creek froze solid. The well buckets came up with nothing but ice. Livestock died standing. Fires wouldn't catch because the air held no breath. The wind carried needles of snow so fine they sliced skin, and in 4 days, nearly everyone had either perished or fled. Some tried to head south, others stayed, too old, too stubborn, too sure it would pass. They thought it would be like the rest, the pastor whispered, like all the other winters. Even I. His voice broke again. They died in their beds. May said nothing, not until he met her eyes. I remember you, at the edge of the cedar bend. You said your mother froze with the baby, that the floor cracked beneath your feet, that the frost rose up. I said you were lying. He reached for her hand. I was wrong. May didn't flinch, but her voice, when it came, had weight. You weren't just wrong. You left me to die. The silence that followed was cold in a different way. The others shifted, but May didn't blink. I didn't die, she said, but I remembered. The pastor nodded, broken. There are others, not many, but they're coming. They followed me. I told them where you were. Please, they're children. May stood. She walked to the tunnel again, where the cold still seeped from the surface. This time, she didn't chip slowly. She dug. By the time the sky dimmed again, though no true sun could be seen, a trail had formed through the crusted snow, and May's makeshift flags, long reeds wrapped with torn hide, stuck up every 10 yards to mark the safest path. And from the white veil beyond, they came. 3 at first, then 8 more, then another dozen. Children, mothers, old men hunched and pale. One woman carried a child on her back, and another pressed to her chest, both swaddled in burlap. A teenage boy guided a blind man with a rope. May opened the tunnel mouth wider. She led them in, room by room, chamber by chamber. The shelter expanded with each hour. Walls pushed back, vents dug longer, heat redirected. Ellis and Ruth gave up their bunks. Micah dug a new sleeping trench near the fire channel. Blankets were torn and reshaped. Every stone was reheated, every breath shared. They stayed alive, and that was no small miracle, because outside, the blizzard hadn't just blanketed the earth. It had erased it. Trees snapped mid-trunk. The river vanished beneath layers of ice thick enough to hold wagons. Birds died mid-flight. Nothing moved, not deer, not wolves. The world itself seemed to pause, and below it all, May's earthbound shelter pulsed with warmth. One night, Ruth found May sitting alone at the far chamber, staring at the packed wall where roots dangled like fingers. Ruth sat beside her. You could have turned them away. May said nothing. You wanted to. Still silence. But you didn't. May finally spoke. Because if I'd turned away someone like me, 12 years old, face chapped, frost in her hair, I'd be no better than them, she exhaled. And I need to be better than them. It wasn't over. The storm would last another 9 days, longer than any living person could remember, long enough that even the sturdiest frontier cabins would have collapsed under their own brittle frames. But not May's shelter. It was low, warm, and made of the earth itself. It breathed, and it held nearly 40 people alive. Some had frostbite. One lost his foot. A baby was born on the 7th day, and on the 12th, the wind slowed. The sky shifted from steel to grey, and the first birdsong in weeks echoed faint and high above the snowbound hills. May stood at the tunnel edge again. The snow had stopped, but what lay beyond wasn't the same world. It was something new, and it would be hers to shape. The thaw came slowly, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the cold. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, May stepped outside and did not feel death clawing at her lungs. The air bit, yes, but not in the way that cut. The sky was not blue, but it was no longer the pewter lid that had pressed down on them. It had softened. A white haze lingered, stretched thin above the ridge, and the sun peeked through as a dull smear. But it was enough to believe they might outlive this. May stood at the highest point of the hill, knees buried to the thighs in packed snow, and saw the valley beyond, and it was gone. Not in the way of fire or flood, but flattened, cabins reduced to bones of timber, their chimneys toppled or snapped like reeds, fence posts warped, no footprints, not even from scavengers, just an endless stretch of white bleached silence. And the town that had once shunned her, the place that had turned a 12-year-old girl out into the dark for lying, was now only suggestion, shape, memory. The storm hadn't just punished, it had wiped clean. May let the wind touch her face. Her skin peeled a little, already raw from exposure. But she didn't move. She needed to see it, all of it, to know it wasn't just a fever dream born of cold and grief. It was real, and she was still standing. They emerged one by one from the tunnel that morning. The pastor first, wrapped in 3 coats he'd stitched together from the hides May's people had once dried. His face had shrunk. His hands trembled when he held them out toward the weak light. Then Ruth, guiding the young mother and her baby, both still alive, both impossibly pale. Then Ellis, then Micah, then the rest. Each face stared up at the brightness, as if it were a memory half returned. May said nothing. She simply nodded toward the town's direction. "Take stock," she said. "If anything's standing, we'll need it." They fanned out in cautious lines, using old branches to poke the snow ahead in case of hidden collapse. Micah took 2 others and angled toward where the dry goods store used to be. Ruth veered toward the schoolhouse, what was left of it. May stayed near the rear, her eyes never still. It wasn't about reclaiming anything. It was about gathering, salvaging, surviving again. They had made it through the worst storm the valley had seen in a generation. Now came the test of what was left. 3 cabins had some walls still up. One had a full corner intact, but inside the stove was cracked and the bed frame warped. They salvaged cloth, some rusted tools, a few blackened pots. The schoolhouse was caved in, but its floorboards had fallen in such a way that a few shelves remained untouched. They found books, wax stubs, a slate board, and behind a collapsed desk, 2 jars of honey sealed in thick glass. Micah returned with half a barrel of oats, so frozen solid it rang when struck, but it could be boiled. It would feed them for a week. They worked all day without speaking much. There was a reverence to the destruction, like walking through bones. Some recognized parts of homes once filled with laughter and meals. Others stepped carefully around buried doors, not wanting to disturb what might lie beneath. May kept moving. She found her own cabin last, or rather, what had been her family's. It was only recognizable by the fence, the half-circle of split rails her mother had arranged herself, woven with branches to keep the wind from creeping under, she used to say. The fence was still there, the cabin was not. May walked to the place where the hearth had been, and knelt. She found the old chain her father used to hang pots. She didn't cry. Instead, she gathered stones, ones she remembered her mother choosing, and placed them in a small circle. She sat there for a while, not thinking, just breathing. Behind her, Ruth approached. May spoke without turning. "It's over." Ruth sat beside her quietly. "No," she said. "It started." They did not rebuild the town. That was never May's goal. The earth had proven itself. The storm had drawn a hard line. Above ground was ruin. Below it, warmth. They dug deeper, broader. But the shelter transformed. What had begun as a single chamber carved by a 12-year-old girl, desperate not to die, had now grown into a network. May oversaw every addition, but she no longer worked alone. The survivors learned from her. They didn't resist her direction. She had saved them when no one else could. Her rules were clear. No walls taller than the trees. Every heat channel must vent 2 ways. Stone before wood, earth before fire. Air must move but not escape. And most of all, remember how it felt. Not just the cold, the forgetting, the way the town had once laughed at the idea that the winter could kill faster than bullets, the way they sneered at her mother for wrapping the baby in 6 layers of wool and fur, the way the pastor's eyes refused to meet hers when he told her to leave. Remember all of it, May would say. Because if we ever think it can't happen again, we die. It wasn't said with malice. It was her creed, and they listened. By the next freeze, the shelter could hold 60, and it did. That winter, 3 more storms came, none as vicious as the first, but enough to test their designs. They passed. One flue smoked, but Ruth spotted it in time. The vent was dug wider, the chamber stayed warm. An upper tunnel iced over and collapsed, but May had taught them to dig redundancies. No one was trapped. They survived again. By the following spring, whispers began. Others, from further valleys, from crumbled rail towns, from broken frontier camps. People who'd heard of a place beneath the hill, a place that didn't freeze, a place where the girl who once told the truth ruled with hands of stone. May didn't like that last part, but she didn't stop them from coming. She built more. It was near May's 27th year when the true test came. A woman arrived alone, half-starved, pulling 2 children on a sled of bark and rope. Her face was hollow, her hands cracked to the bone, but her voice held steel. She told May of another blizzard, not here, further west, a mining town, 53 dead in 2 days. She had seen men burn their cabins down for warmth, her husband among them. When that failed, she ran. She remembered hearing of the hill that didn't die. She walked 5 days to find it. May took her in, but not just her. The others that followed, a dozen, then more, ragged, frostbitten, some with horses, some with nothing but feet wrapped in rags. May's hill became more than a shelter. It became a last chance, and it held. They grew to 80. Then 93, then 108. The chambers expanded again. More stone, more clay-reinforced walls, ventilation that ran like breathwork, heat trapped in rock, pulled gently through flues designed with the precision of memory and fear. May had no title, no official name, but they called her the Hearth Mother, not in ceremony, but in need, and it fit. One night, Ruth, older now, eyes lined by years and soot, asked her something by firelight. Do you ever think about going back? May looked up. Back where? The world? The surface? May smiled faintly. It's all surface now, Ruth frowned. No, I mean, being part of something that isn't just surviving. May stirred the coals. We're not just surviving, she said. She gestured to the walls, to the children curled in woven beds of straw and wool, to the line of preserved food jars stacked in clay niches. We're proving, Ruth nodded. Proving what? That truth survives. May leaned back, eyes heavy. They called me a liar, she said. They punished a child for saying what she saw. And then the world proved me right. Ruth was quiet. May closed her eyes. We're still here. That's all the proof I need. But the world was changing, and May knew it wouldn't stay quiet forever, because while she had learned how to hold warmth, others might come to steal it, and the frost never stopped learning either. It just waited, deep in the soil, biding its time. The men came in spring, not in a wagon, not from the old towns. They were dressed in hard canvas and double-stitched coats with collars turned high, and boots too polished for frontier mud. 5 in total, 3 white, 2 Mexican. Their horses were too clean. Their eyes didn't scan for wood or game. They looked for walls. They found none. May watched from the rise behind the venting hill as the strangers slowed at the tree edge. She didn't move. She didn't call for the others. She just stood there in the brush, heart slow but alert. As the wind played at her coat, they spoke to one another in low voices, then dismounted and walked forward on foot, no weapons drawn, but their posture read like steel under wool. The tallest one, a man with a scar at his throat and hands too smooth to be honest, stepped up to the small stone ring that marked the top of the main flue. He crouched, tilted his head, then smiled. May moved back through the underbrush. Inside the shelter, Ruth met her near the fire channel. The room was busier now, children carrying logs, women packing clay around a new wall face, Micah driving steel wedges into a rocky flank. May drew Ruth aside with a nod. Visitors, May said. Ruth's face darkened. How many? 5, not settlers, something else. One of them found the flue. Ruth swore under her breath. You want us to seal? May shook her head. No, we face them. When May stepped into the open, the wind shifted again, less biting, more inquisitive, as if the land itself waited to see what she'd do. The men had moved further down the hill, now standing where the snowmelt formed a soft patch of earth along the base. The one with the scar turned when he heard her boots. You must be her, he said. His voice had the polished grain of someone used to getting answers. May didn't answer. He smiled easy. I heard stories. Woman in the hill, children underground. People come out warm while everyone else rots stiff. Still, she said nothing. Another man spoke up. We're from the rail office, surveyors. This hill's marked for a switchback. We're laying a line out west. May let that sit in the air a moment. Then, this hill's already occupied. Not legally, her eyes narrowed. That stopped mattering a long time ago. The man with the scar stepped forward. We could offer you something better, a real home. You could help us design the way we house our trackmen. Imagine what your ideas could do. Warmth, venting, earth-based storage. You wouldn't have to live like animals anymore. May tilted her head. You think we live like animals? He paused. I meant primitive, isolated. You're wrong on both, May said. Then she pointed to the snow-covered valley. Look out there. Count the cabins. Count the dead. Then ask which way of life survives. The railmen shifted, uncomfortable. May stepped closer. This isn't your land. Not anymore. The frost took it. We survived. You're not building a line. You're looking for warmth, for what you lost. She stepped past them, walked right up to the base of the hill, where her vent flue steamed faintly in the wind. You won't find it here. The scarred man said nothing, but May could feel the shift in his stance. Calculating, cold. They didn't argue. They didn't threaten. They simply nodded and left. But May knew what silence like that meant. They'd be back. They came again in late summer, this time with 12 men, axes, picks, shovels and rifles. May saw them before they reached the hill. Her lookout, a young girl named Lacey, having spotted their dust trail from the ridge. May didn't panic. She didn't run. She gathered her people. All of you, listen! The crowd in the chamber thickened. Nearly 120 now. The chamber was hot from cooking fires and fresh clay drying on new support walls. Children clung to parents. Young men stood with shoulders back. "They want what we have," May said, "but they don't know how to make it. They only know how to take." She looked at them one by one. "We won't let them." Micah stood at her side, silent as ever, but he held something new in his arms, a thick bar of wood sharpened at one end and fire-hardened. Behind him, Ellis stepped forward too, holding another. May raised a hand. "We don't fight unless we must," she said. "We protect, that's all. The earth is our shield." Then she gave instructions. The railmen arrived with noise. Not guns, not yet, but the arrogance of industry. They pounded the ground, pulled up brush, hacked at the venting stone rings. They shouted into the earth, demanded. May gave them nothing. Instead, deep beneath, her people opened the old steam vents, ones they'd sealed seasons ago. They rerouted fire smoke through the upper passages, forced heat to rise in jets along the tunnels nearest the surface. From above, it looked like the hill was breathing fire. The men panicked. Then the traps triggered, not with blades or blood, but collapses, false holes filled with dry snow and shale, loose stone triggers that sent scree down onto their boots. Nothing fatal, just humiliating. And finally, from the trees, May stepped out again. This time, she carried a torch. She didn't wave it. She just let the light catch the smoke curling from the ground behind her. "I told you," she said. The man with the scar stepped forward again, dirt on his collar now, his voice not quite so smooth. "You think we won't bring more?" May didn't smile. "I think by the time you come back, your boots will rot, your horses will starve, and the frost will rise again, and you'll beg to sleep where I sleep." She let the torch drop. It hissed as it hit the soil, steam curling upward. They left, and they didn't come back that winter. Word spread after that, not because May told anyone, but because every drifter, every snow-broken homestead, every storm refugee eventually crossed someone who had come from the hill. And they carried stories that the earth kept people warm, that the woman who built it had once been left to die, that her fire never went out. May didn't build a name for herself. The name built itself. Hearthmother, Earthguard, Stone Child. They were all wrong, but they were all true. She never corrected anyone. She just kept digging. One night, Lacey asked her, "What happens when we run out of space?" May looked up from her fire trench. "We won't. But the hill's only so big. Then we dig sideways, deeper. Let the mountain take us." Lacey hesitated. "And what if the mountain says no?" May paused, then looked the girl in the eyes. "Then we listen." It wasn't a threat. It was reverence. She had never forced the land. She read it, responded to it. The warmth came not from dominance, but respect. That was what made it work. The others didn't understand that. The men who built walls above ground, who thought they could tame wind and sky and snow by yelling over it. May understood you lived with the world, or you didn't live at all. The frost returned in her 30th winter, harder than before. Winds howled for 19 days. The snow buried the trees to their upper limbs, and the shelter stayed warm. More joined them. They had to expand again. Children born underground now helped build the next rooms. And somewhere, deep in the cold, May's own memory of exile faded. Not because it hurt less, but because the hill had overwritten it with survival. She didn't forget, but she didn't bleed from it anymore. And the warmth she had built, it lived in more than just stone and clay. It lived in the hands of those who now called her name not out of desperation, but gratitude. May rarely ventured above ground anymore, not from weakness. Her limbs still held strength. Her hands could still shape earth, wield a wedge, pull a child from snow with the same quickness she'd had at 20. But above the hill, the world had changed too much, and she had changed more. She no longer belonged to the surface. Her life was in the chambers now, the endless maze of tunnels and hollows that had grown, not from plans but from need, from survival, from stubborn memory. They had started as sanctuary and had become civilization. Below ground, they had light, warmth, medicine, crops grown under glass domes that refracted heat, mushrooms, sprouts, herbs. Water moved through channels she had carved, filtered through layers of sand and coal. Smoke rose through clay stacks disguised with bark and branches. Warmth pulsed through the stones like breath. It was a world built not to dominate nature, but to work with it, a different kind of society. And now, it was time to pass it on. May sat alone one morning at the old tunnel entrance, the first one she'd dug when she was 12, with bloodied fingers and her mother's voice still echoing in her bones. The tunnel mouth was sealed now, of course, but she sat near it each year, just as winter ended, to listen, to remember. This time she didn't hear silence. She heard footsteps. Micah approached slowly, no longer a boy, but a man, with shoulders like stone and eyes that saw everything. His beard was rough. His coat was stitched with dozens of patches from the years he'd worked every tunnel, every vent. He crouched beside her, quiet for a long while. Then he spoke. "They want to name the new chamber after you." May didn't answer at first. Micah glanced at her. "Are you all right?" She finally turned her head. Don't let them do that. He tilted his head. Why not? You built this, all of it. Without you, we wouldn't. You would have, she said. Eventually. Someone always survives. Someone always sees what no one else believes. I just saw early. Micah sat cross-legged now, hands resting on his knees. You think they'll forget? They're already forgetting, May said softly. They speak of the frost like a legend. They call the ventwork magic. They speak of the old towns like myths. Even some of the children don't believe there were ever cabins on the surface. That's not how this started. She pressed her palm to the packed earth wall beside her. It started because no one listened. Because a girl warned them and they laughed, Micah nodded. But we listened. You did, she said, and others. And now I need to leave something they can't forget. That spring, May did something no one expected. She brought the children to the surface, not all of them, just a group, 10 in total, ages ranging from 7 to 13. She led them in silence through the winding ascent tunnels, through the slow rise of temperature and light, until they reached the wide entrance hollow she had designed in her 25th year, an opening sealed with a boulder that rolled aside when pressure was applied in a specific way. She opened it. The sun hit their faces like a revelation. They gasped, squinted, reached for her hands. May led them up the slope. The air was crisp, the sky cloudless, but the town was still gone. Only stones remained, half-buried outlines of the buildings that once stood. Some trees had returned. Others remained charred from lightning strikes or windburn. The wind moved through the empty field like an old song. May pointed to the edge of the field. There, she said, that's where the pastor stood. When he told me I was lying, the children looked. She pointed to another ridge, and that's where my mother's cabin stood. We had a rocking chair. My brother died in it. A few of the children stared at her. She crouched in the snow, pulled out a piece of flint, and drew in the frost with a stick. This is where you came from, she said. Not just the tunnels, not just the hill, but this. She made them gather stones. They built a ring. Inside the ring, May placed a piece of clay, a piece she'd carved long ago from the first chamber wall. It had her mother's initials on it, barely legible now, but there, she buried it. This is not a grave, she said. This is memory. Memory keeps you alive. Not fire, not food, memory. When the next frost comes, and it will come, you'll need more than tunnels. You'll need to remember why they were built. The children didn't fully understand, but they felt it, and that was enough. Back in the shelter, life continued. The flues carried heat. The chambers glowed with light. They taught new children how to carve air paths, how to layer clay and stone for strength, how to store food beneath beds, how to trap heat with iron rings and hide flaps. They taught not just survival, but respect. May moved slower now. Her hands ached more in the cold, but her mind remained sharp. She wrote. Ruth brought her scraps of parchment stitched from bark and pounded hide. May etched symbols, maps, diagrams, not just how, but why. She wrote stories too, not grand tales, just memories, ones she feared would vanish if not told. The day she buried her mother, the first time she caught her own fish, the feel of the frost rising underfoot. She left nothing out, not the fear, not the shame, not the exile, especially not the exile. One night, Lacey, older now, with her own daughter asleep in her lap, sat by May's bedroll in the central chamber. The fire pulsed low, a thin line of steam coiled from the rocks. Do you ever miss the town? Lacey asked. May turned her head. No, not even before they sent you away. May thought for a moment. There was one night, she said. I was 6. My mother boiled potatoes. My father sang. The wind didn't howl. That night, yes, I miss it. She smiled faintly. But I don't mourn the place, only the people. Lacey nodded. Then, you built something better. May didn't answer. She just closed her eyes. She passed in the night. No pain, no cry, no struggle, just silence. Ruth found her before dawn, hand still holding a scrap of bark with a tunnel sketch on it. Her other hand rested against the clay wall. Her final act, it seemed, to press her warmth into the place one last time. They did not bury her. She had asked them not to. Instead, they sealed the chamber, not in mourning, in reverence. The walls were reinforced, the air path rerouted. Inside, her writings were stored in sealed jars, her sketches etched into stone. A single mark was placed at the entrance. She saw the frost and built against it. No name, no title, but everyone knew. Years passed, generations. Above ground, the world changed again. Men came back with steel and rail. Sir, but they passed over the hill without stopping. Too wild, too inconvenient. No place for commerce or war. The forest grew tall again. Snow fell and melted, but beneath, the hill lived. Children were still born there, still taught to read the air, still taught to sleep near stone. And each year, when the first frost came, they gathered at the old sealed chamber, and whispered the name no wall ever carried. May, a girl who saw the winter before it came, and built a future out of earth and will.